Good afternoon and welcome to Black Hat 2011. You're currently in the threat intelligence track. We have Alex and Julia from FireEye who will be discussing the Rustock botnet.
Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. So just a really quick announcement besides filling out your feedback form. If any of you knew Len Sassman, there'll be a memorial Friday at DEF CON, Friday night in one of the Sky Talks rooms. So anyway, so Alex and I are going to tag team on this basically, and basically for the next hour or so, we're pretty much going to cover similar spam botnets and some of the history of Rustock, as well as the current takedown that Microsoft did earlier this year. So I guess Alex will probably take over from this point.
Sure. So I'm going to get started. So my name's Alex. I'm a FireEye. Oh, these mics work pretty well.
And if you need a laser pointer.
Sure. So all these people couldn't get into Kaminsky's talk? That's a little surprised. But yeah, so obviously not a marketing presentation, but I do want to talk real quickly about the way that people typically got infected with Rustock and with other bots that are kind of similar to it, and with some of the small intricacies that were built into Rustock to make each different step of the infection lifecycle work a little bit better. But I don't think it's really any surprise to anybody that people get infected either via the web or via email today. You know, there's certainly a small percentage of malware that comes in via USB stick or other infection means. But for the most part, you're getting infected through some sort of drive-by download or some sort of email attachment, right? It's attacking either the browser or the browser infrastructure, PDF, Flash, Office, QuickTime, Real Player, all the plugins that sit inside a browser that enterprises are very bad at patching, and home users are even worse. So because of that, that's where they've gone after. And then, once the exploit comes in, obviously, the only thing browser-based malware does, or the only thing exploits do in the realm of browser-based malware is download and run an executable. So it doesn't matter if it's a PDF exploit or a JavaScript exploit or a whatever. For the most part, the only thing the shellcode does is download and run an executable. And then once they have persistence on the system, they're going to beacon out to remote command and control. So that's the whole exploit lifecycle. So you probably think, okay, well, botnet takedowns aren't that hard, right? All you need to do is gather up all the malware for the same family, right? If you pick a DDoS bot or you pick a spam bot or you take a data stealer, if you have access to massive amounts of malware, which most AV companies, most security companies do, either from your customers or from a commercial source, you can gather up all the malware and then track down the command and control, and then take it down, right? Talk to people, say, hey, that's bad, you got to stop doing that, and the bot goes away, right? Well, that's kind of what I thought at one point. You think that, in general, people want to do the right thing, whether it's a domain registrar or registry, or maybe it's some sort of ISP or hosting center. If you're providing good data, they'll act on it. And that's true in the US, which we can see in Rustock, but I want to show an example of Grum, which is another top 3 spam bot that I tried to take down a couple of years ago, and it didn't work. And I'll talk about why it didn't work and actually the harm it created because I failed at taking it down. But Grum's a huge bot. Hundreds of thousands of nodes, sends billions of spams per day. Depending what stats you look at, what anti-spam vendor, whether it's Ironport or whether it's Semantic or whoever it is, everyone has kind of a different way of measuring spam, but it's always in the top couple spam bots worldwide. And just like Rustock, the command and control for Grum never changed. Well, why do we call it Grum? We call it Grum because the bad guys called it Grum, the criminal. So in the actual downloader that pulled down the initial infection, he was calling it getgrum.php, which is why the whole industry calls it Grum. Naming malware is always kind of interesting. Everyone has a different name, but in the case of this is pretty much what everybody calls it. So that's kind of how we started. We started tracking the downloads of this, because that's kind of how you have to do your research, right? You can't reverse engineer something you don't have. So you figure out the characteristics it's using to pull down the malware, and you gather up, hundreds or preferably thousands or tens of thousands of samples of the malware, and you start running it. Right, so when we started running Grum, this was in like 2009. Hopefully it's big enough. Yeah, we noticed that the vast majority of the command and control servers existed in 2 major net blocks. But then when you dig deeper those net blocks, when you look at routing charts, you look at advertisements or whatever, you saw that those prefixes were only being advertised by one data center. And that was this data center called SteepHost. And these guys still exist. So this is naive me. This is a couple years ago me. I said, okay, well, you know, I know exactly where the command and control is. It's obviously one group supporting this botnet, right? I should be able to turn this over to all their upstream providers or to the data center or to whoever, and they'll take it down, right? Well, they don't. They don't. So I put on my FireEye hat and I sent this nice official email, and I sent them all the Grum stuff. You know, I sent them all the information about. I sent them all the information about that specific box. It was really evident that all this was there. But they also were hosting, you know, generic malware. They were hosting, you know, link crawlers that were doing like forum spam. They were hosting, you know, all that jazz. So I wrote this really nice Word doc, and I sent it to their upstream provider, data group or something like that. And I got no response back. Well, so I took it, and then I sent it to data group's upstream provider, Global Crossing. And I got a little bit of a response. And they said, oh, thank you very much for your automated abuse report. Someone will take advantage, or someone will take note of this. So they took a few of the IPs and they put in /23 null routes. It wasn't on the whole subnet. It was just on a very selective number of the IPs. And that basically made it so that if you're going through that route, you weren't going to be able to get to it. So you can see that I just incremented the IP by 1 in the trace route, and I was able to get to it, right? So just very, you know, specific null routes. So what do the bad guys do? What does SteepHost do? Well, they say, okay, well, I'm going to get a backup provider so that if someone's null routing my connections, so before, this is what the connection looked like. All their traffic went through data group. And when a null route was being placed actually on Global Crossing to go through data group, they got a backup provider to just for a little bit of resiliency. And it kind of makes sense that they would want to do that anyway because you want to have a dual home network. But they weren't before. But with a little bit of pressure, it forced them to go and buy more connectivity. Was that good? No, not really. It really didn't have any operational effect in terms of overall spam on the internet. You know, the computers are still infected. It put them out of business for like maybe half an hour. But because these guys are like in a legitimate data center, they're in like, it's kind of like a peering point or like an internet exchange. They had access to all these other, you know, tier 1 or tier 2 internet providers, so they just buy transit from other people. And then worse than that, they started adding multiple levels of obfuscation to their command and control servers. So this is what the bot talked like at the time. It doesn't look like this anymore, and I'll get into that. But this is what the bot talked like at the time. When you connect and you knew what page to go to, it would give you this unique ID. And then this ID would be used as a key to do the obfuscation or like bad encryption for the command and control. But if you hit the command and control server directly, it would throw up this fake musician's friend website. And they were actually like iframing it to musician's friend. So they went back, SteepHost went back to their upstreams and said, oh yeah, you know, I guess the computers got compromised. I'm guessing what they said, right? I guess the computer got compromised and, you know, see, it's really a legitimate site. You know, it's not command and control. But at the same time, they were, you know, still an active C&C. And they did it with a bunch of the other C&Cs. So this happened like hours after the null route. Like they were clearly watching exactly what was going on. And so this is a fake blog, but it's the same principle. If you connect the way the command and control expects to, you can still talk to it. But then a few weeks later, they got freaked a little bit. So they had used that old command and control structure that like gets spam ID, like very clear in the UI for a long time, like a year and a half. And they've actually subsequently sold off that code base, or at least shared it with someone else. So what they did is they changed their command and control structure. So now everyone who had written snort signatures for what the old bot looked like, those didn't work anymore. And they changed it to this like fairly innocuous looking UI, or URL rather. And they started embedding the command and control inside the user agent field. So all those snort signatures just didn't work anymore. And the bot was still up. So was this successful? no, it was like a pretty big failure, right? So that's all I'm showing here, is that now it's all embedded inside the user agent. And this is what it looks like today, right? It's still a top, pardon? Oh, yeah. Oh no, I guess I'm not supposed to ask questions. You can ask questions if you feel like that. You can shout it out. I don't really care. But the command and control is now embedded inside the user agent. So it's not like particularly super sophisticated, but it was good enough to defeat all the standard mechanisms that people had put in place to detect that bot. Ukraine, no, yeah, it's based in the Ukraine.
I'll repeat the question.
Oh yeah, so he had asked that I'd kind of made a distinction about, good ISPs and bad ISPs and good registrars and registries and bad ones. And in this case, I mean, it looks like they own a whole bunch of the infrastructure. So if you can fake being a legitimate data center, right? If you tell your upstream that, oh yeah, I'm a data center, I have lots of customers, you can kind of pass the buck and say, oh yeah, it wasn't me doing this bad stuff, it was one of my customers. Oh yeah, I'll go tell my customer to go clean it up because he had some vulnerable WordPress installation that led to him getting compromised. It's obviously actually the guy who owns the data center. Yeah, so then they changed up their obfuscation a little bit. So now if you wget, and again, I just did this like yesterday, if you wget the new command and control, it gives you a 404 back. But if you connect the way the bot expects, which has like the proper user agent and what the encryption key should be, then it sends you down the encrypted command and control. So it's a little naive to think that you can just collect all the data about the bot and then hand it off to the people who provide them access and have it do anything. It unfortunately isn't quite that easy.
All right.
So Julia's going to talk a little bit about some of the early Rustock stuff, and then I'll get back into it.
All right. So Rustock was first named in about 2000 by Symantec. In the long tradition of no two antivirus companies ever calling a piece of malware by the same name, it was also known as Costrad and RK Rustock and some other stuff. Initially, it was a very different sort of bot at the time. It used IRC at the time, IRC for its C&C at the time, which is fairly common in 2006. And the C&Cs were on the Russian Business Network, along with many other botnets at the time. It also just, rather than having its own SMTP engine, it just had a SOX proxy. And the C&C would literally just send through the SOX proxy on the victim machine to whatever C&C and stuff like that. It did some of the fairly old-fashioned rootkit type tricks. So it slowly evolved a bit. About 2007, it switched to using HTTP for its C&C communications, and it switched to being a template-based spam bot. So for template-based, basically doing your own SMTP through a proxy is rather slow and inefficient. So what the C&C does is it hands like a mail merge type template to the bot and a list of email addresses and says, send this email to this list of email addresses and fill in the blanks appropriately and stuff. So it's a lot more efficient because then you've got you've parallelized your sending by about 1 million fold or whatever the size of the botnet is at the time. Anyway, it was initially propagated via spam messages where there'd be some sensational subject line and click here for this news story about whatever crazy thing, and a lot of people would fall for it and it would basically run the program and install itself. There was also a number of drive-by exploit done as well, where you basically look at you end up in some web page, exploits your browser, shellcode downloads this executable, runs the installer. Fairly standard stuff. Around this time too, it was Rustock, a lot of the spam was sending out was also claiming to be from Microsoft as a very sort of advanced fee scams, where it's like, oh, we've won this prize from Microsoft. Send us all of your personal information so that we can send you this prize money, kind of a thing. A lot of Viagra spam and so forth. And interestingly enough, Joe Stewart actually did this really great analysis of some of the penny stock scam that we're sending out at the time. It looks kind of like this. Anyway, you get this email, and Joe was like, who knows would fall for this? So, but he actually went and looked at the stock price for this stock, and he found that this is basically when the spam campaign went out. Like literally, like the stock price like jumped, and even if I mean, like who would buy stock based on recommendation from a spam message? But it may just be that everybody kind of knows it's kind of shady, but they figured they could maybe they think they can get money out of it before the stock price drops or something. And it's the greater fool theory, I guess, from stock trading or whatever. There was also, but also actually, Joe Stewart actually got his site DDoSed for a while because of this research that he published. The advanced fee Microsoft type things look like this. It's like your email is when you have 1 million Great British pounds and blah, 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 typical 419 scam stuff. So so in 2008, after the infamous Russian business network had gone down, many of the CNCs were hosted at Intercage until it went down in September of 2008, and then after that, almost just about all of them were actually hosted at Mikolo, which was depeered in November of 2008, and that's another long story. There were several botnets like Srisby that were also hosted at Mikolo. It was like literally the entire AS range was nothing but CNC servers and like spam advertisement hosting and stuff like that. So yeah, we ended up actually we took this opportunity to actually hijack the Srisby botnet and permanently shut it down, but we didn't quite get it all done for Rustock. So we hijacked part of the Rustock CNCs during this period, and this is about where we plotted most of the incoming bots coming from at the time. So there's only partial data though, but
right. So the idea is that when Mikolo was still up, all these bots, the backup mechanisms were kind of evolving. Some had static domain names built in. Some had these kind of first generation domain generation algorithms where they would generate a certain number of names based on the time. Yeah, which is really popular now, but back then it wasn't. So what we found was that when the Rustock command and control servers went down, they had a bunch of backup names that weren't registered. So all we did was just register them very quickly. So we were able to get like a pretty brief insight into the bot.
Yeah, and that's where the data from this is from. We did the similar trick for. Oh, what was the question? Red versus purple. I think it's the size of the. Actually, what did? Yeah. What was the?
CNC. Yeah.
Okay, the red ones were CNCs. Okay, so yeah, I guess most of the hosting. Yeah, Mikolo was in San Jose at the time, and this has been, I guess, some other data that was mixed in, but. So yeah, it was. So Rustock was using hard-coded IPs at the time, and some of the versions of Rustock actually did have a backup set of DNS names, but so a bunch of them didn't. However, on like Saturday, after the initial takedown, Mikolo, I guess, made use of their backup peering agreement with Telia in Sweden. And for about 12 hours, the IP block was routable again. And so the people operating Rustock took the opportunity to quickly push out an update to all of the bots that did still connect the IP range to point them to a new server in Russia. And anyway, 2009, more of the same. And just kind of sending more and more and more spam. I think it actually ended up being 2009 is when it finally hit being the majority of source of all spam on Earth. So you were actually going to mention on the encryption stuff.
Yeah. So the Aurora, which I'm sure everybody has heard about and was wildly overmarketed in 2009 and certainly continues to be overmarketed. What was interesting about that attack was that it used something that wasn't next gen then, but it was certainly not used very widely. and that was using some sort of encryption, really obfuscation, built into the initial shellcode, so that when the shellcode executes and it calls URL download file A or URL down the cache file W or something, it pulls down a file, and that file is obfuscated. So this is the first stage downloader. This isn't like an exe that exists and it's going to pull down over SSL. This is basic obfuscation that's built into the shellcode, so that when it brings down the exe, it's encrypted. And the only reason you would ever do this is to defeat some sort of network-based device that's generically watching for like a PE header, right? Looking for MZ, extracting to the end of the TCP flow, and then reconstructing it. That's really the only reason you'd do this on the network layer, because to the host, it's going to get reconstituted to an executable, just as if it was downloaded directly. So Aurora did this 2 years ago. And unfortunately,
It was not the first.
yeah, it was definitely not the first time,
Yeah.
but it wasn't very widely used. You know, the concept was around, but really only in targeted attacks. But now what you see is essentially Rustock doing the exact same thing, which I'll talk about in a sec. But you know, a few years ago, in like the Macolo days, the pay per install infrastructure was really just kind of coming up to speed. Again, it existed, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. And Rustock was distributed almost entirely through the pay per install mechanism. So the initial shellcode executes, it downloads a file, and all that file does is go and download other files. Right? That executable doesn't have any real functionality built into it, except to go and download other files. So from a dynamic perspective, from an analysis perspective, these downloaders have been really effective because they're not doing heuristically strange things to the desktop. Right? When you pull down one of these downloaders, and there's obviously exceptions, but for the most part, they're not like hooking anything in kernel mode, they're not escalating privileges, they're not generating a whole bunch of outbound connections. All they're doing, they'll come with like a couple of URLs, sometimes a text file, and they'll just reach out and download things and run them. So that gives them a lot more flexibility because they can put 1,000 URLs into one of these things, and they only need one to get through. Right? So that's kind of how they're able to be so successful. And there are a bunch of services that have popped up to support this. And there's whole teams of people that all they do is install software for other people. So Gangstabucks is down now. It's not around because it got too popular. So I pulled this off Brian Krebs' blog. But Chris Greer from UCB had also sent this to me after I'd posted something about Rustock on our corporate blog. And he said, oh yeah, well, all that Rustock stuff is being downloaded directly by Piptia, which is the downloader pushed out by Gangstabucks. Which we'd kind of known, but it's always nice to get third-party validation from people. But interestingly, when Rustock, when that downloader, when Piptia was downloading subsequent files, in the case of Rustock, it was downloading encrypted files. So it's not just interesting that it's downloading something encrypted, it's that not only was it downloading things that were encrypted, so in this case, Rustock was coming down as this password-protected RAR, which I'll talk about. It's that initial downloader had to know how to decrypt this, right? So a standalone executable, pulling down the encrypted piece, you have to know how to decrypt it, right? How to run it. You know, and you might see a fake JPEG header, so it knows, okay, skip the first 200 bytes and then extract it. Or it could be some binary blob and it say XOR'd it by 55 and skip null bytes. Or, you know, there's a whole bunch of different obfuscation techniques. But that initial executable is downloading Rustock, encrypted. But it was also downloading a whole bunch of other stuff, like gbot and like other fake AV and other things that were built into the very same downloader executable, which kind of makes a connection between Rustock and some of this other crap that they were actually pushing out, like fake AV software. So just the connections you can draw between what was built into some of those downloaders and some of the malware families they were fetching are interesting. But anyway, I talked about how it pulls down this fake RAR file. They did something interesting on the downloaded file, which would never be seen by a human, right? If you're on a desktop, you're never going to see this stuff coming down. This is only to defeat other network-based people. So network-based tools that are watching for executables, or in this case, they're watching for RAR files, they would see this, and what they're trying to do is throw them off the trail. So they'd actually call this RAR file, which is like 2 steps into the infection process, my backup 21, or my photos, or photo 21, or backup.rar. they would name the RAR files something completely innocuous. So if you were a network guy, like if you were an analyst at some big company, or you just were watching network data, watching for statistically interesting things or heuristically interesting things, if you see this RAR file come down, and let's even say you extract it, right? You extract this file called mybackup21, and you try to open it, and it ends up being password protected. So it's not just that you would think, oh, I can't tell what it is. You're probably going to go in the opposite direction. You're probably going to say, okay, well, it's completely reasonable that someone password protects their RAR file, even though RARs are maybe a little weird. They password protect their RAR file if it's called my backups. So they think in the other direction, like, oh yeah, it's probably legit. I'm probably not going to look into this. So the only reason you would have built that type of obfuscation into it is if you were trying to throw off network-based analysts.
So anyway, so yeah, like I was saying, if you grab one of these RAR files and try and just even look at the metadata in it, you prompt for a password and nothing will ever work. One of the interesting features about the RAR file format is that it's a solid archive where all of the metadata is basically included with the compressed data and also encrypted all at once. So RAR doesn't actually, the only way RAR knows this is actually a RAR file is by looking at the initial header and then just kind of trying passwords and stuff like that, or trying to see if the CRC will work after decryption. So this is one of the actual Rustock samples as the update came down encrypted. As you can see, it's got a regular RAR header and then white noise. When you actually decode it, it ends up looking like this. It's a regular Windows, this kernel device driver. And the crypto they used was it's fairly simplistic. The key is actually stored in the file, which is actually not that uncommon for a lot of these homemade crypto algorithms. Basically, it's a 4-byte key, and you do some math on it. Basically, you add it with a constant, and then you just take the least significant byte of the key and XOR'd with the least significant byte of the encoded data, and that's your output byte. And then basically the 4-byte key is just permutated in various ways to essentially get the next byte for the stream. Anyway, so I think that was about 2009, I guess. So in 2010, the other interesting developments were that Rustock seemed to have gone on vacation over Christmas, and nobody exactly knows why. There was a noticeable drop in spam back in October last year when Spamit went down. That was basically the Canadian pharmacy affiliate program thing that was where Rustock got most of its money from, I guess, apparently. Was basically sending spam on behalf of that whole group and stuff like that. But it was the way that the affiliate thing worked was basically it was basically a way of contacting purveyors of imitation pharmaceuticals with operators of botnets and how to get money for spam campaigns or something like that. It was basically it's how the business side of this thing apparently works.
Right. Yeah. Krebs had done a really interesting write-up about this. I talk about Krebs a lot, but he did an interesting write-up about this. You guys should all read, where he was analyzing not from a spam perspective, but from a back-end perspective of all these affiliate programs. Unfortunately, the affiliate programs, a lot of them compete with each other. So like bad guy A group wants to discredit bad guy B group so that they use one service over another. So they leaked the database of one of the competitors to Krebs. They're like, oh yeah, here's a bunch of data, go and blog about it. And what he found was that the top 3 affiliates were all the same dude. So the top 3 money earners for Spamit, all use the same web money ID, and they were all the Rustock guy. So he would register multiple affiliate accounts and manage to be the top 1, 2, and 3 affiliate for these huge spam campaigns and just make boatloads of money. But he didn't want to be too big or else everyone would get pissed at him oh, who is that one username? So he would register multiple accounts on all these services and still be the top earners for all those different accounts. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So anyway, so over Christmas, the botnet just stopped for a couple of days, about 9 days, or however many days that is, about 2 weeks or something, and nobody knows why. And last I heard, nobody has found out yet. So for all we know, the operators were abducted by aliens for 2 weeks. I don't know. But anyway, this is, if you look at the statistics, you can see the drop, like right over Christmas vacation.
Yeah, Rustock's always had an interesting spam pattern that's a little bit different than all the other bots in that it's not like continually sending spam the way some of these things are. It sends like massive amounts of spam in spikes. So like one spam run, and it was because it is implemented at the kernel level, it was more efficient than a lot of bots. It was able to send a lot more spam. Similar to like Sprisby, which is another similar fairly sophisticated rootkit. It's able to send it much more efficiently at a much lower level, which is why you see those peaks, because it doesn't need to send it over time. It has enough bots that it can just pump out everything at once. And it's a little harder too for the anti-spam vendors to catch up if you send it all at once instead of over the course of a couple hours.
Right. So anyway, other things that it started using over in the last 2 or 3 years was going to a random DNS name based off the current date type of backup mechanism. So the next time anyone tries to, shut down all the CNCs, it would still be recoverable via the DNS names. Did a bit of encryption, not very well. The interesting thing about a lot of the CNCs, besides being a lot of the DNS being fastplex, is the A record would have the wrong IP address in it, or rather, it would have a transformed IP address. So if you ask, what is the IP address for holybible.com or whatever, and it'd send you back, oh, it's 1234, and then Rustock would take that and transform it to the actual IP address and connect to that with the appropriate headers being faked for it and so forth. Let's see, this one was this was like one of the main, this is like the main incoming DNS name for most of earlier this year.
Yeah, so a lot of times this name would never exist. So it would do the lookup on like some other domain name, would get an IP address, and then would connect directly to this. But like for the most part, this domain name, if you were to look it up directly, never connected to anything. But what was interesting about the way they kind of changed their communications, and like you'll see this throughout the different steps of their infrastructure, they're trying to fool different types of people in the different ways they do obfuscation. So again, in this case, they're going after the network guys. If you're a network analyst and you're looking for statistically strange URLs or URI calls or maybe strange headers or user agents or something like that, they embedded a proper user agent. They had a full HTTP header instead of just like very small chunks that some people will, because you can get by with just like a get or a post and then a host header. So like that's all you need for HTTP to work. But if you look at what a browser has, it's like accept language, accept encoding, pragma, all that garbage. So they added that all in, even though they didn't really need it. And better than that, they actually made all their posts, all their connections, look like you were logging into a message board and posting to a thread. So they copied the format that you used for, it wasn't PHPBB, but it was one of those like popular PHP-based bulletin boards, and they embedded their command and control in those URLs. So again, they could have easily not done this. They could have done it on something that was easier for them, but they specifically did it this way to not just make people say, I can't tell if that's good or bad, but if you see this, you're like, oh, that's a message board post. That's obviously legitimate. So like you go in the other direction of thinking it's completely legit. So that's why they were able to stay around and be the biggest and baddest for so long.
Anyway, so the other innovation around this time was they switched to a multi-tiered command and control structure, so that basically all the bot machines would talk to around March by about 96 CNCs, and then behind those, basically these are the ones everybody could see because it's what the bots are talking to and all the DNS points do. But behind that, there was some other set of CNC servers that was essentially sending instructions out to these, and these are not visible, so to speak, from this side of the world. And the other thing about this, though, is if you're going to do a takedown, you need to get this entire tier, or else if there's even one control server left, all of the bots can be updated because there'll still be one responding to it. And this kind of structure also lets the operators, essentially the command and control servers end up being very ephemeral, so that even if they go down, it's probably much easier, really easy for them to bring another one up, since there isn't really any smarts on this layer. And so yeah, if they do go down, they usually start doing the DNS name lookups. There was one static name and then a bunch of algorithmic generated ones. So other changes, it started using SSL for doing the SMTP around the end of 2009, and it stopped in 2010, probably, well, initially probably because a lot of heuristic spam classifiers will give an incoming message a higher score if it comes in transported over SSL. And then by early 2010, I guess they stopped doing that, possibly for performance reasons, because if you don't have to do the whole SSL handshake, it's probably a lot faster to pump out billions of emails. They also actually used, they'd actually go through Hotmail's web interface too if the user had credentials for it. The DNS was fast flux between a whole bunch of servers, like you say, and it also, to try and bypass a lot of heuristic spam classifiers, it would grab random strings off of Wikipedia through the random page interface. And if you look at some spam messages, it's basically, you can see how the forms kind of work. Is the from line is basically, 4-digit number with some other stuff at, a bunch of DNS names probably pulled out of the recipient email list or something like that. Then the whatever plus the random text from Wikipedia. So sometimes it doesn't quite make any sense, like that or whatever. But anyway, it's enough to bypass a lot of simple classifiers, I guess, or at least keep the score low enough to sneak by. So by late last year, 2010, and early this year, all of the C&Cs for Rustock were all but 2 of them were actually hosted within the United States, and the other 2 were hosted in Amsterdam. And like places like in Kansas or Missouri and Kansas, and there's some that Bay Area and so forth. Went down in Texas, or a couple down in Texas actually. There's about, was it 9 hosting providers? I think it was
6 or
7,
something like that. Yeah, but the key is that again, if you go back to the old days, you could really see Rustock evolve throughout the years as kind of the security community has evolved and how security tools in general have evolved. It went from IRC communication to hard-coded IPs for command and control to this random domain generation, and now they're using network-based inferences they're building into the network communications to, again, throw people off the trail. So just like APT and sophisticated malware did this a few years ago, now you're seeing it built into truly commodity malware, or malware that's not targeted and not advanced or whatever. So in the old days, and today certainly, if you get hit by APT, the first hop isn't going to China, right? It's going to a server in some nondescript place in the US. Maybe it begins one more time and then it goes back to China. Well, spam bots are starting to do that too, right? So they pick servers in possibly the most, I don't want to say nondescript, but the only thing I can think of is the Saturday Night Live routine with Vice President Biden when he talks about Scranton, Pennsylvania. So they bought a bunch of servers in Scranton and use that as a big command and control point. And they bought a bunch of servers in Kansas City. And they these places that there's nothing wrong with Scranton, Pennsylvania, but it's not just that it's not suspicious, it makes you think that it's completely legit. If you see traffic going to Scranton, you're like, yeah, that's probably legit. What bad could possibly be going on there? So just really, I don't know, you see they built so many things into it that make you think it's legit instead of doing it the easy.
It's somebody's posting a message to holybible.com hosted in Scranton.
Yeah, Holly Bible in Kansas City. Seems legit,
So this slide skipping ahead a little bit, but this is skipping ahead. Microsoft. This is actually where most of the victims were based on research that Microsoft did. So
Yeah, so the way they did this, we'll talk about the takedown obviously, but the way this was generated is Microsoft used a bunch of legal mechanisms, which we'll talk about, to seize
yeah,
certain domain names and then sinkhole the domains. So then they were able to see.
Oh, this was actually before they did that, though,
No,
wasn't it?
that's from the sinkhole.
Oh, this was in the court filing. Oh, whatever. So in March, so Microsoft filed a bunch of court papers to basically get the U.S. Federal Marshals to go and physically seize all the Rustock C&C servers that were hosted within the U.S. And they I don't know precisely what they did in Amsterdam, but in any case, so yes, it did it simultaneously. It was all done like within an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the Microsoft DCU guys, they have this whole department that's basically set up to like bring the hurt to bad guys. And they kind of approached us and they said, what do you think? Not just it would be able to be taken down, but is causing a lot of harm to our customers. And from where we stand, we make a product that detects malware. Rustock was like not just the most prevalent, but it was causing like a very easily measurable amount of harm on the internet. Like if you go after like a banking Trojan or like a DDoS bot, it's sometimes hard to come up with a metric to figure out if it was actually successful. So when anybody wants to go after something, you want to measure success. So they said, what do you think you could provide us some intel on that would help us, both validate what they were seeing and from like a third-party security company perspective, just basically give us your input. So we put together a set of monitoring tools where we were feeding them all the command and control servers that we were seeing on a daily basis. And obviously they have their own research teams that are extremely bright, but they wanted some validation from someone not associated with Microsoft that what they were seeing was both right and it was the whole picture. Like what Julie was saying, if you take down, so they had like 96, I think, first level command and control servers. You miss one, they can very easily push out an update and really kind of screw a lot of the work that you did. So they came to us and they said, what do you think? Is Rustock something that you could help us with? And we said, yeah, absolutely. So they had us write up a declaration of, the harm that we thought it was causing their customers and some of the, just generic badness we were seeing on the internet. So we did that and we filed it actually in February. And this should all be public. We filed it in February, and the judge said, well, what are you asking me to do? Like this is completely outside anything I've ever asked someone to do, because we're basically saying, hey, all these bad guys are doing bad things and all their servers in the US, but they're not really their servers. They're the servers, like if you think about the way a data center model works, that's typically either rented servers, it might be co-located, co-located where you physically ship a server to some third-party location and you're just buying transit, but you're basically asking the court to tell these third-party providers to turn over access to servers that they may or may not own. Like there's just a lot of like kind of strange mechanisms. So he said, come back in a few weeks and I'm going to reread this and I'm going to, make a judgment. So that's what happened in a little bit before this in March. The judge finally said, yep, okay. And there were some law enforcement people there, but we'll talk about the technical stuff.
So the Microsoft's name for this was Operation B107, following a similar sort of methodology and naming scheme as Operation B49 last year, which took down Wolodeck. And in that case, they just took over the entire DNS infrastructure, essentially administrative control over the DNS names, and that was enough to basically redirect the botnet into to Microsoft sinkholes. But this isn't applicable for Rustock, obviously.
Just one more quick note on that. So so most of those domains existed inside the .com and .name space, and it's not just that a registrar or registry. So like, right, the way DNS works is you have registries that are responsible for ccTLDs and gTLDs, and then you have registrars who essentially resell those. And sometimes you have a shared model. But it's not that some of these registries, and in particular this one was in the US, it's not that they didn't want to help out, but it's that they weren't exactly sure whether they had the legal authority to help out. This is sort of the coordinated takedown is sort of a new model that security and the ISP community are sort of working on. But like what Julie's saying, in that case, the DNS infrastructure wasn't going to be enough because they had some IPs hard-coded, and you couldn't just take out the domain names, which is what happened in Walladac, and it's also what happened in MegaD, where we happen to have good relationships with other registrars, and they essentially just gave us the names, which was very nice of them. But that's the first, I think, legal mechanism that anyone's used to take domains.
Right. Anyway, so legal counsel at Microsoft, Richard Bosovich, came up with this great idea for how to do this. And there's an interesting clause in the Lanham Trademark Act that I probably should have quoted here, that basically allows anyone who owns a trademark to seize counterfeit goods. And so basically the legal argument that was made was that these C&C servers had spam templates that claimed to be from Microsoft or from Pfizer selling Viagra or whatever, and that's trademark infringement. And they're selling counterfeit Viagra and whatnot and stuff like that. And so basically it's under the jurisdiction of this Trademark Act, and all of the C&Cs are also within the U.S. jurisdiction, so this still applies. And there was a lot of victims in the U.S. also, and so basically the jurisdictional requirements have been satisfied as well. The actual request that Microsoft made is kind of written like this. Basically, it says, all your servers belong to us, kind of. Anyway, it's basically, take over the whole thing so that the operators can't do anything else. So after they actually seized the hard drives, they did actually confirm that there are spam templates claiming to be from Microsoft and Pfizer on there. Not really surprising. These are the seized hard drives in question.
Yeah, so it's not. So I do want to be clear because like some of the press got it wrong originally. They didn't seize the servers as like any sort of punitive damages. They were granted temporary access to the servers to get any sort of forensic detail that might exist on them so that they can go after the bad guy, right? And that's still ongoing, but certainly if a bad guy doesn't think, or he thinks his servers are pretty bulletproof, and these were up for like a year and a half, so there's a reasonable chance that he thought that he was pretty well protected, so he might have made a mistake, such as connecting directly to it, like SSHing right to the server, or leaving things on it, like leaving a code base, maybe he's compiling something, leaving code artifacts, leaving things inside the server side of the command and control that's never meant to be seen by a person. You never see that. So that was the idea in going after the hard drives. And then obviously just kind of a shot across the bow to the criminal himself.
So.
But when you do something like this, like you have to show damages, right? That's why I couldn't just sue. I couldn't do this myself, right? Because I can't show any damage from the spam. But there's a whole bunch of other damages that Microsoft is able to show other than trademark infringement. And they're kind of interesting ways. So one of them is the Hotmail service. So they didn't like actually go out and calculate this, but there's a measurable loss in CPU power, in heating and cooling, because these spam bots were sending fraudulent mails to Hotmail addresses. So Hotmail had to deal with this anti-spam capacity. At one point, this is like 50% of spam on the internet. So this is not like a small amount of spam. So it's, Hotmail has all those problems, but if you think about a corporation, you're buying like, I don't know, so you're a 10,000 person company, you have to buy like Cisco Ironport anti-spam. You've got to buy like more capacity than you actually would have needed if Rustock didn't exist. So there's very real damages that corporations could show against this. But more than that, what I think is the brand damage malware does to Microsoft. If you ask like anybody who uses a Mac, except for maybe some of this community, but if you ask like your parents or your friends, why do you use a Mac? Oh, well, Macs don't get malware. I don't get these problems. Like, well, they're not any. The security is like a totally another thing. But the fact that malware is prevalent on Windows computers is like one of the major reasons. And it's, it's the brand damage there is incredible from this type of malware.
Yeah, and this was actually, because I messed up when I was doing the slides earlier this morning. But the other uses for the CNCs was there was also Tor exit nodes on the CNCs, and there was also a number of attacks against servers in Russian IP space that were originating from the CNCs.
Right. Yeah. So they're creating basically Tor bouncers on these command and control servers that they were using themselves as another means of misdirection, right? So that's something they can give to their upstream providers, that if something bad comes out of these servers, they say, oh no, I was just hosting Tor, it must have been someone else, it wasn't me. But they're really good at the different ways of misdirection.
Right. So since March, there's kind of there's a couple of suspects that were pulled from the Spamcop database, actually, that was leaked. Cosma2k is apparently the handle, but the name behind it may or may not be Dmitry Sergeyev, or one of these other ones, or Sergei Sergeyev, which is like John Johansson in English. It's a fairly common name too, so it's like sort of like going after somebody named John Smith. But funny thing, Brian Krebs did a bit of research on this, and one of the hosting providers he contacted, Brian Krebs contacted, and the operator of the botnet hadn't paid their hosting bill, and so the operator was happy to like say who had purchased this hosting service, and it was basically a web money account that was a confirmed, verified one, which basically involves going to some physical office in somewhere in Russia and showing a picture ID, and the name associated with that was Vladimir Alexandrovich Shergin, and one of the funny things that Krebs discovered was the resume for one of these people. And there's some kind of really interesting things written in here. I mean, besides University of Belarus kind of stuff like that, but there's like right here in the middle, it says that this person's an expert in the field of installations, whatever that means. Anyway. So let's see. Also, since March, Microsoft's been doing the due diligence to try and get a hold of the people whose property they seized. They've been running full-page advertisements. Well, they tried to email and ICQ like every means of contact with these alleged people that they could think of. So far, nobody's responded. But funny about that. But anyway, they've been running like quarter-page advertisements in a couple of like two newspapers, like in St. Petersburg and Moscow or something like that. The advertisement or the things here is basically saying, "Hey, we seized a bunch of servers and IP addresses. If they're yours, please contact us if you want them back or anything." This is the. I mean,
people laugh, but like one of the big things that Microsoft's kind of like the man, this big, huge company. So you get all these like security naysayers who are like, oh yeah, well, what if they had actually, accidentally taken a server away from a good guy, the bad guy was just using it. It's like, you do a lot of reconnaissance ahead of time so that you don't do that. And like these command and control servers, it's not like, if you look at any big CNC, these things are controlling like, I don't know, like 10,000 bots at once. Like you can't do that on a regular Joe Blow hosted platform. Right, they had like 100 servers that were full dedicated hardware. It was very apparent these were dedicated. These weren't shared servers. But obviously, no one complained that their stuff was accidentally taken down. It's just, if you're careful, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I find this quote hilarious. It's from the court update that no customers of the IP addresses in question or the domains in question have requested that the IP addresses and domains be reinstated. Because, anyway. So Anyway, so from Microsoft's sinkhole, the number of bots has actually been declining. Back in March when this was done, it was about 1.5 million, and now it's about half of that. So it's, I guess it's, well, 2 data points. It's hard to say if that's linear or exponential, but.
Yeah, you know, measuring bots by source IP is like just a pretty bad way to do it, especially when you do it over more than the course of a couple of days. So if you get 1.6 million hits over a week, you know, it's pretty fair that it's around 1 million.
Yeah, I can't remember if there may be a unique identifier in this case. I've forgotten.
Not that we'd have.
This one?
The sinkhole would, but.
Yeah. Anyway, similar techniques were used for core flood back in like May or June or whatever it was. Anyway, so so this is what global spam volumes look like.
Yeah, so this would be the CBL guys who do a really good job of tracking bots based on handshakes of like the mail agent. Like they actually all have unique handshakes, kind of either based on time or based on headers. So the CBL guys, and I don't think it's public who they are, so I won't say who it is, but they do a really, really good job. And so they were tracking Rustock, and so the left is over 1 month and the right is over 1 week, and you just see it completely flatlines. It just stops, which is where the takedown happened. But the spamcop guys, who I think are owned by Cisco, that's what all the big green spikes are. And then when the spikes stopped, that's when the bot went down. So we think it was pretty successful because, I mean, spam is, you know, in general on a downward swing, especially direct to MX spam as opposed to spam via stolen accounts. But I don't know. A lot of people say takedowns don't work, and I kind of showed at the beginning how you can screw it up if you don't really understand what's going on. But when you're working with the courts and registrars and registries and ISPs and companies that are willing to spend a ton of money on this, which I have to imagine Microsoft did. I worked with these guys for like a year. I can't imagine the number of billable hours they were charged, but it can work if you go at it the right way.
Right. So I guess shout outs to everybody. So basically a lot of people worked on this. Microsoft did the bulk of the work, I think. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, the Microsoft guys obviously deserve all the credit. All we did was just provide them with the daily list of C&Cs to help them validate their own internal research.
Right.
But they had a bunch of people write declarations on behalf of them. And we didn't even really talk about the Pfizer stuff. But Pat Ford, who at Pfizer, actually bought a bunch of the drugs. He got like he got real credit cards and bought a bunch of the drugs and had them tested. And there was a 60 Minutes thing where Pfizer was highlighted, and there was any range from like a pretty good knockoff of the drug to just garbage, like just filler, to the wrong thing, like instead of getting, you know, Viagra, you get like blood pressure medicine, or you get Viagra mixed with penicillin, which is kind of like, you know, you might not. It's actually a pretty good marketing idea if you think about it. Yeah. So there's a really good 60 Minutes episode about that you should check out. But obviously, a lot of the earlier stuff, Julie had mentioned Joe Stewart did on and Brian Krebs. Everyone does a good job with this stuff.
Yeah. And also as a footnote, and I forgot to mention earlier on the hosting within the US and Amsterdam is another possible reason is that the US and Amsterdam have very, very good network connectivity. And if you're, you know, continuously talking to about, 1.5 million machines, you need enough infrastructure to handle that much bandwidth. I was actually going to do the math and calculate about how much bandwidth I was actually needed if I didn't do the math.
Yeah, I mean, but try to imagine a corporate network that's 1.5 million computers. Like, except for like some sort of like DoD network, I don't know what would possibly have that many systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Any questions? Okay.